The sun had barely begun to set when Elon Musk pulled up to the gates of Gene Hackman's sprawling estate. The mansion loomed ahead, bathed in an eerie golden light, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns. The grand old house had once been a symbol of Hollywood's golden age, a place where stars had dined, laughed, and celebrated under the brightest of spotlights. But now it felt like a forgotten relic of a bygone era. Elon had heard the news, of course. Gene Hackman, the legendary actor whose face had been burned into the collective memory of cinema lovers for decades, was dead. So was his wife, Betsy, Arakawa, and their dog. The cause of their deaths had been a mystery, with no signs of foul play, just a sudden, inexplicable collapse. One minute they were fine, the next they were gone. It was a tragedy that sent shockwaves through the entertainment world, leaving questions unanswered and curiosity piqued. As Elon made his way through the grand, empty hallways of the mansion, the place felt cold, a stark contrast to the warm memories that the mansion likely held. He had come here for a business meeting, intrigued by the idea of a collaboration. But now the house felt more like a tomb, a place full of history, but haunted by the recent tragedy. He passed by old portraits of Hackman in various iconic roles, his stern gaze frozen in time. The grand staircase spiraled upward into darkness, and the faint smell of dust and decay lingered in the air. Nothing in the house seemed to move. Not a single sound other than the echo of his footsteps on the hardwood floors. As Elon made his way through the house, something caught his eye. Just the slightest glimmer of light coming from an obscure door tucked away behind an ancient bookshelf. It was unusual, almost too perfectly placed, like something waiting to be found. He paused, his curiosity piqued. It was almost as though the house was urging him to look closer, to step into the unknown. He approached the door slowly, his fingers brushing the old wood as he pushed it open. The door creaked loudly, an unsettling sound that resonated through the silence of the mansion. Behind it lay a narrow staircase leading down into the basement, a part of the mansion that seemed abandoned, untouched by time. Elon hesitated for just a moment, sensing something he couldn't quite explain. The air felt thick with an unspoken history, as though the house was hiding something that had been concealed for years. Without a second thought, Elon stepped down into the dark, his feet landing softly on the cool, concrete floor below. The faint smell of dampness filled his lungs as he descended further. The atmosphere grew heavy, the shadows clinging to the edges of the staircase. At the bottom, the tunnel stretched out before him, stretching far beyond what he could see. The walls were lined with symbols, strange, cryptic carvings, faded and worn by time. Each one seemed to tell a story of an ancient past, yet the significance eluded him. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, his mind racing with 1,000 possibilities. The house had always been full of stories, but this was something different. This wasn't just a mansion. This was a mystery. Elon reached for his phone, but just before he could turn on the flashlight, the ground beneath him trembled, just a slight vibration. His heart skipped a beat. It wasn't an earthquake. It was something else, something more deliberate, something that had been triggered. And then a whisper, faint but unmistakable, echoed in the tunnel. It sent chills down his spine. "Welcome, Elon Musk." His blood ran cold. There was no one else down here, no one. Elon's breath caught in his throat. The mystery had just taken a terrifying turn. What's down there? He thought to himself. The shadows seemed to close in as he stared into the dark abyss of the tunnel ahead. And in that moment, Elon Musk realized that this mansion, this place that had once belonged to a Hollywood legend, held far more secrets than anyone could have ever imagined. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon stood frozen for a moment, the cold air pressing in around him. The whisper had been so faint, so surreal, that for a second he wondered if his mind had been playing tricks on him. Yet the feeling of being watched, of something hidden just beyond his sight, was undeniable. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as he listened carefully, trying to make sense of it all. But there was only silence now. His logical mind took over. "Get a grip, Elon," he muttered to himself, swallowing the lump in his throat. He checked his phone again, but the flashlight still didn't work, the device giving him nothing but a blinking error message. He couldn't turn back. There was something about the tunnel that had caught his attention, something that felt too important to ignore. In fact, the more he thought about it, the more Elon realized that the tunnel might hold the answers to questions he hadn't even considered yet. He took a deep breath and stepped forward into the darkness. The walls of the tunnel were close, and with every step, the air grew denser, colder. The faint glow he had noticed earlier now seemed more pronounced, coming from somewhere deeper within the tunnel. It was not the typical light of a lamp or flashlight. It shimmered, flickered, like a distant star. As he moved closer, his eyes adjusted to the dim light, revealing more of the strange symbols etched into the stone walls. They were almost hypnotic, swirling patterns that appeared to dance in the dimness. Some were familiar, resembling ancient languages, while others seemed entirely alien. He ran his hand along the wall, feeling the uneven surface beneath his fingers, and a chill rushed through his body. The tunnel twisted and turned, as if leading him deeper into the bowels of the earth. His mind raced. Why would Gene Hackman's mansion, a place famous for its opulence and history, conceal something like this? It didn't make sense. The Hackmans were known for their charity work, their place in the Hollywood elite. Gene was a revered actor, and Betsy was an accomplished artist and philanthropist. Yet their lives had been cut short so suddenly, with no clear explanation. Elon's curiosity pushed him further, his steps growing more confident as the eerie glow grew brighter. He eventually reached the end of the narrow passage, where the tunnel opened into a vast chamber. His heart skipped a beat. This was no ordinary room. The space was massive, with a high ceiling that stretched upward like an ancient cathedral. The glow emanated from something at the far end of the room. It was a pedestal, stone old and covered in dust. But what stood atop it took Elon's breath away. An artifact. It wasn't just any artifact. It was a strange, intricate sculpture, its form curving and twisting in ways that defied normal. Geometry. Something about it felt otherworldly, like it didn't belong in this time or any time. The shimmering light seemed to pulse from it, drawing him in. But what shocked Elon even more was the discovery surrounding the pedestal. Scattered across the floor were old books, torn pages, and handwritten notes. Some were in English, others in languages he couldn't recognize. There were photographs, too, grainy black and white images of Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa posing with other people in strange settings. The pictures seemed to capture moments of quiet contemplation, as if the Hackmans had been caught in a ritual of some kind. Elon crouched to pick up one of the books, brushing away the dust. The cover was old and cracked, the title worn away by time. As he opened the first page, he could barely make out the words. They were written in a language that appeared to be a mixture of ancient symbols and a script he had never seen before. His mind spun with possibilities. This wasn't just a treasure hunt. This was something far more significant. Gene and Betsy had been involved in something much bigger, something that, if discovered, could shake the very foundations of everything they'd built. As Elon flipped through the pages, his fingers trembled. There were mentions of an ancient order, a hidden society that had guarded secrets for centuries. The artifacts, the symbols, the strange rituals, they all pointed to something larger than anything he had imagined. Gene and Betsy had known. They'd uncovered the truth. And now someone, something, was trying to bury it. He slammed the book shut, his pulse racing. There was no going back now. The answers were in front of him, but the risks were even greater. His mind raced as he tried to process it all. Who had been behind the deaths of Gene and Betsy, and why? Suddenly, the silence of the chamber was broken by a faint sound, like footsteps approaching. Someone was here. Someone who shouldn't be. Elon froze, the blood draining from his face. He was no longer alone. A figure stepped into the chamber, their face obscured by shadow. The faint sound of breathing echoed through the space. Whoever this was, they had been waiting for him. Elon's heart pounded in his chest, each beat resonating in the otherwise still chamber. The figure before him remained motionless, a shadow against the faint glow of the pedestal. Elon's mind raced, trying to comprehend the situation. Who could this be? Was it someone from the authorities? Had they followed him down here? Or was it something else? The figure took a slow step forward, the sound of their boots echoing in the quiet room, sharp and deliberate. Elon's body tensed, his instinct urging him to flee, but something held him in place. Curiosity, adrenaline, fear, all tangled together. In his chest, making it impossible to move. Finally, the figure spoke. The voice was low, almost a whisper, but it sent chills running down Elon's spine. "I knew someone would eventually find it." Elon's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling within him. The figure stepped into the light, revealing only a glimpse of their features. A pair of piercing, cold eyes stared at him from beneath a hood, and their face was obscured by a mask. They wore a dark coat, the fabric worn and torn in places. But the aura around them, something ancient, something far older than the mansion itself, was undeniable. "The question isn't who I am, Elon," the stranger replied, their voice taking on a tone of eerie familiarity. "The question is, what are you doing here?" Elon's pulse quickened. "I came looking for answers. Gene Hackman, Betsy Arakawa, they didn't just die by accident. This tunnel, the symbols, the artifacts, they're connected to something bigger, something you're clearly involved in." The stranger's laugh was soft, almost a chuckle, as if Elon's words amused them. "Ah, so you've begun to piece it together," the figure said cryptically, "but you're only scratching the surface. There's so much more here than you realize, Elon, so much more that Gene and Betsy never told you. They knew this place, this order. They knew exactly what they were getting into." Elon's mind reeled. "The order? What order? What are you talking about?" The figure stepped closer, their voice dropping to a near whisper. "The ones who protect the truth, the ones who guard the knowledge that the world isn't ready for. Gene and Betsy, they were part of something far beyond their Hollywood fame. They were involved in a society that has existed for centuries, and they uncovered something that could change everything." Elon took a step back, his breath shallow. What could be so dangerous that they had to hide it? Why were they killed? The stranger's eyes flickered with something, regret maybe, or sadness. "It wasn't just them who were killed, Elon. It was a message, a warning. You see, Gene and Betsy weren't the only ones who knew. There are others, powerful people, who will stop at nothing to ensure this knowledge remains buried. But they didn't realize you'd find it." Elon felt a shiver run down his spine. He had never believed in conspiracy theories, in secret societies or shadowy organizations. But the artifacts, the symbols, the underground tunnel, it was all too real to ignore now. He needed to know more. "What do you mean, I'd find it? Why would they want me involved?" Elon asked, his voice growing more desperate. "What is this knowledge, and why is it so dangerous?" The stranger took a deep breath, seemingly weighing their words carefully. "Because you, Elon, are different. You have the mind to understand it, the vision to use it. The world needs someone who sees beyond the surface, someone who can take this knowledge and unlock its potential. That's why they killed Gene and Betsy. They were too close to the truth. But you? You're the key to unlocking everything." Elon's mind whirled with possibilities. The stranger was right about one thing. He wasn't just an inventor. He saw things others didn't, connected dots that were invisible to most. But this was far beyond anything he'd ever imagined. A hidden society, ancient artifacts, a power that could change the course of history. "What happens now?" Elon asked, his voice tinged with both fear and excitement. "What do you want?" "From me." The stranger's eyes locked onto his, and for a moment there was a flicker of something dangerous. "You need to understand what's at stake here, Elon. The path you're about to walk will change everything. You'll be hunted. They'll come for you, just like they came for Gene and Betsy. But if you're ready to unlock the truth, to use it wisely, then you'll have the power to change the world." Elon stood there in the chamber, the weight of the stranger's words sinking in. He had always been someone who sought innovation, who pushed the boundaries of what was possible. But this wasn't just technology or engineering. It was something much more profound. Suddenly the ground beneath him trembled. the air growing thick with an ominous energy. The stranger looked toward the tunnel entrance, their expression unreadable. "They're here," the stranger muttered under their breath, before turning back to Elon. "You need to make a choice, Elon. Now. The knowledge you seek is within your grasp. But it comes with a cost, and there's no turning back." A loud crash echoed through the tunnel, followed by rapid footsteps. Someone, or something, was coming for them. Without another word, the stranger turned, disappearing into the shadows of the tunnel. Elon hesitated, his mind spinning, but then he heard it. Voices, footsteps, growing closer. Whoever they weren't here to talk. Elon stood at the threshold of the chamber, staring into the dark abyss ahead. He had a choice to make: follow the stranger or escape before it was too late. The knowledge, the power, it was all within his reach. But so was the danger. Elon's breath came in shallow bursts as the footsteps grew louder, each echo reverberating through the chamber like a warning. His heart raced, the pulse of adrenaline flooding his system. For a brief moment, he considered turning back, running up the stairs, pushing through the door and leaving this whole mess behind. But deep down he knew he couldn't. The knowledge, the power, was right in front of him. Whatever this secret was, whatever the Hackmans had uncovered, it was far bigger than any of them had realized. And now, it was up to him to decide whether to take the plunge. The stranger was gone, vanished into the shadows of the tunnel. But Elon couldn't afford to follow them, not yet. Whoever was coming wasn't far behind, and he couldn't let them find him in this cavernous room without understanding what was at stake. His eyes scanned the chamber, the faint light from the pedestal casting long shadows across the walls. His gaze landed on the tunnel that seemed to stretch on endlessly in front of him. There was no turning back now. This was the path that led to the truth, no matter how dangerous it might be. He pulled himself together, the tension in his body giving way to a sense of purpose. If he was going to survive this, he needed to stay one step ahead. He darted to the edge of the chamber, where a second, narrower passage branched off to the side. He had no idea where it led, but it was his only chance to avoid the mysterious figures drawing closer. The walls of the new tunnel were different, darker, colder. The air here smelled stale, as though it had been sealed off from the world for centuries. His steps echoed loudly in the confined space as he crept forward, trying to make as little noise as possible, but it wasn't enough. A low growl followed. By the sound of shifting stone echoed through the tunnel, sending a wave of dread through him. The figures were close. He could almost hear their breath, feel their presence pressing in from behind. The path narrowed even further, forcing him to crouch slightly as he moved through the dark. His hands brushed against the walls, feeling for any sign of danger or escape. The only sound was his own breathing, now rapid and erratic as his fear mounted. What was he running from? Who were these people? The tunnel twisted and turned, and just as Elon thought he might be able to escape into the labyrinth, he came to a dead end. His heart sank. He'd been so focused on getting away that he hadn't noticed the lack of exits in this part of the tunnel. The walls were smooth, unyielding, and there was no way forward. He spun around, panic rising as he heard the sound of footsteps growing louder. The figures were upon him. "Damn it," Elon muttered under his breath, but as his gaze shot around the dead-end tunnel, something caught his eye, something he hadn't noticed before. At the far corner of the room, partially concealed by thick shadows, was a large stone block slightly out of place with the rest of the tunnel's architecture. It was a subtle difference, but Elon's mind immediately began to race. Could this be some kind of hidden passage? He rushed to it, his fingers tracing the edges of the stone. It was cold, the surface rough beneath his touch, but there was something strange about it. The texture was different from the surrounding walls. He pushed against it with all his strength, but it didn't budge. Sweat trickled down his forehead. As the footsteps grew louder, the figures closing in. Desperation flooded him. He wasn't going to die in this cold, ancient tunnel, not without understanding the truth. With a final burst of energy, he slammed his shoulder against the stone, gritting his teeth. For a second there was resistance, but then, with a loud grinding noise, the block shifted, a secret passageway, a way out. Elon didn't hesitate. He dove into the narrow opening, barely able to squeeze through as the stone slid back into place. Behind him, with a resounding thud, the sounds of the footsteps, the figures chasing him, disappeared as the passage grew quieter. The new tunnel was narrow and winding, but it was a stark contrast to the dark, ominous atmosphere of the previous one. The walls here seemed ancient, but somehow more polished, like they had been maintained, even revered. Elon pressed forward, his pulse racing in his ears, the sound of his own breathing loud in the narrow space. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time lost all meaning as he continued deeper into the earth, further from the danger that had been hot on his heels. Finally, he reached a small chamber. It was a stark, hidden room, unmarked by any symbols or strange markings. It felt safer. And in the center of the room was an object that made his breath catch. A pedestal, much like the one in the larger chamber, but this one was different. On it rested a stone tablet, intricately carved with symbols that seemed familiar yet alien. He approached it slowly, carefully, afraid of triggering something or someone who might be watching him. The tablet was old, worn by time, but the carvings on it were legible. Elon ran his fingers over the stone, reading the ancient symbols that seemed to pulse with energy, as though they held the answers to everything. He felt as if the room itself was alive, charged with a kind of power he couldn't explain. The tablet depicted a scene, strange, yet oddly familiar. A group of people, dressed in ancient robes, stood in a circle. In the center, a glowing orb hovered, surrounded by a series of intricate geometric patterns. Elon's heart skipped a beat. It was the same symbol from the books, from the chamber back in the mansion. And then, beneath the image, a phrase was etched in stone, one that made Elon's blood run cold. The truth is not for the weak. The ones who seek it will become the hunted. The words hung in the air, their meaning sinking in slowly. Elon had been right. The danger was real. Whatever Gene and Betsy had uncovered, it was far beyond anything he could have imagined. And now it was too late to back out. As Elon took in the warning on the stone tablet, the air shifted again. A faint rumbling echoed from deeper within the earth, the walls shaking as though something was awakening. It wasn't over. The hunt was just beginning. The rumbling beneath Elon's feet grew louder, the walls vibrating with a strange, otherworldly force. The air around him felt charged, almost electric, as if something deep within the earth had been disturbed. His instinct screamed at him to leave, to escape the tunnel and run back to the safety of the outside world. But the tablet, the symbols, it was all too much to ignore. He had come this far. There was no turning back now. Elon's hands trembled as he traced the ancient carvings on the stone tablet again, trying to make sense of them. The symbols were like a code, some kind of language he had never seen before, but their meaning was clear. This was something that had been hidden, something that had been kept from the world for a reason. And Gene and Betsy, well, they had been part of it. They had uncovered the truth, and now they were gone. The words etched into the stone seemed to pulse with a life of their own, and for a moment Elon felt a wave of dread wash over him. The ones who seek it will become the hunted. The warning was clear, but was it meant for him? Had he unwittingly stepped into a world far darker and more dangerous than he could have imagined? As he continued to study the symbols, something else caught his attention, something he hadn't noticed before. Beneath the intricate carvings was a series of smaller symbols, more faint, more delicate, as though they were added later. They looked like a map, a detailed illustration of a place he didn't recognize. His pulse quickened. Could it be? Was this the location of something even more important? Something that Gene and Betsy had discovered just before their deaths? Suddenly a faint noise echoed through the room, a whisper of movement, like the flutter of a breeze. But it didn't feel natural. It was too still, too deliberate. Elon froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Someone was here. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He wasn't alone. But who? The stranger? Or something, someone else? "Who's there?" Elon called. Out, his voice more strained than he intended. He wished he had more than just his wits to protect him. But this place, it felt like an ancient labyrinth with dangers lurking at every turn. A figure stepped from the shadows, tall and imposing, their presence enough to send a chill through Elon's body. It wasn't the stranger from earlier. No, this man was different. His face was partially obscured by a hood, and his posture was rigid, almost military. "Elon Musk," the man said, his voice smooth but cold. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Elon tensed. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer right away, instead walking slowly toward the pedestal. His eyes never left the tablet, his gaze darkening as he studied the symbols. He seemed to recognize them, or at least understand their significance. "You're the one they sent," Elon said, his voice low. "To stop me?" The man looked up at Elon then, his expression unreadable. "Stop you? No, I'm here to make sure you understand what you've gotten yourself into." Elon's heart raced. This wasn't a coincidence. The man knew exactly what this was. But what did he want with him? "You don't know what this is," the man continued, his voice carrying a hint of regret. "You think you're on the path to some grand discovery, but you're not ready for what's at the end of it. Gene and Betsy, they weren't just killed because they found the tunnel. They were killed because they found the truth, and now you've found it too." Elon's breath hitched. "The truth? What truth? What are you talking about?" The man's lips twitched into a faint, humorless smile. "The truth that Gene and Betsy uncovered wasn't just about a hidden order or secret societies. It's about something far more powerful, far more dangerous. And now you've opened the door." Elon felt a sinking feeling in his chest. He had felt it, the energy, the pull of the truth, but now he realized just how little he truly understood. This wasn't just a secret about an ancient society or hidden treasure. It was something that could change everything. The man's eyes grew darker as he spoke. Gene and Betsy were part of something bigger. They knew this was coming. They knew someone would eventually find the tunnel and the artifact. They knew that when the time was right, someone would need to be ready to make a choice. But I didn't anticipate you. Elon stepped back, his mind racing. "What do you mean?" "Are you Elon?" the man said, his tone now colder, more serious. "You are the one who will decide the future. The truth you've uncovered is dangerous because it has the power to reshape the world. But not everyone is ready for that. Some will do anything to keep it hidden. Some will do anything to make sure the world never knows." Elon's heart pounded in his chest, the weight of the man's words settling heavily on his shoulders. He had been chasing after answers, trying to piece together the mystery of Gene and Betsy's deaths, trying to unlock the secrets of the tunnel and the artifacts. But now it seemed that the truth was far more complicated and far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. "You've crossed a line, Elon," the man continued, his voice low and dangerous, "and now you have a choice. You can walk away, leave this place and forget everything, or you can continue down this path and face the consequences." The air grew thick with tension, the walls of the tunnel closing in on him. Elon felt a knot tighten in his stomach. His mind raced, his options narrowing. He had come so far. Was he really ready to turn back? Was he willing to risk everything to uncover the full truth? The man's gaze never wavered, and for a moment, Elon felt like he was standing at the edge of a precipice. Whatever decision he made, it would change everything. Suddenly, the walls trembled again, the rumbling sound growing louder. This time, it wasn't just the earth shaking. It was something far more ominous. Something was coming. The tremors escalated. The man's eyes widened in alarm. "It's too late. They're coming." Elon didn't need to ask who. He could feel it. The dark presence closing in on them, the weight of the world pressing down. The truth had awakened something far worse than he had ever imagined. The ground beneath Elon's feet trembled violently, throwing him off balance. His mind raced as the tremors intensified. The stone walls of the tunnel groaned in protest, and the man before him shifted into a defensive stance, his eyes darting to the darkened passageways ahead. "They're close," the man muttered under his breath. His words were low but urgent, each syllable laced with an unmistakable sense of dread. "You have to decide, Elon, now." Elon's thoughts were a blur. He could feel the weight of the decision hanging over him like a cloud of inevitability. The man's cryptic warnings echoed in his mind. "The truth you've uncovered is dangerous. Some will do anything to keep it hidden, But then came the rumbling, the growing sound that seemed to come from deep within the earth, an unsettling thud that reverberated through the tunnel walls. Elon glanced behind him, expecting to see the shadows of unknown pursuers, but there was nothing. Only the unsettling stillness, broken only by the violent tremors. "What is it? Who's coming?" Elon demanded, his voice sharp with growing panic. The man's face hardened, his features set in a grim expression. "It's them, the ones who have been waiting, the ones who will stop at nothing to keep the truth buried." Elon's heart pounded, and his breath caught in his throat. It was all starting to fall into place. The death of Gene and Betsy, the strange tunnel, the warning on the tablet, and now this. A presence that had been waiting for this moment. Waiting for him. He swallowed hard. There was no going back now. The man's eyes locked with Elon's, and for a split second, Elon saw something flicker in his gaze. A strange, reluctant understanding. "You don't have much time. If you stay, you might learn the truth, but you'll never leave, not alive. If you run, you'll be safe for now." Elon's mind was torn. The truth, the power of what he had uncovered, was too compelling to ignore. But the consequences, the danger. He glanced at the tablet again, then at the man. He could feel the pull, like gravity, dragging him forward. There was no escaping it now. "I'm not running," Elon said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside of him. "I didn't come this far to turn back." The man's face softened, but only for a brief moment. "Then you'll face the consequences. There's no turning back, Elon." Without another word, the man turned and began to walk toward the dark passageway. Elon hesitated for a moment, the weight of the decision still heavy on his chest. The rumbling grew louder, more frantic, as if the very earth itself was protesting his choice. But he followed. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, the air grew, colder, thicker, as though the darkness itself was closing in around them. Elon's steps echoed off the walls, each one a reminder of how far he had come, and how little he knew about what lay ahead. They walked in silence for what felt like hours, the only sound the steady thrum of the earth beneath their feet. Then ahead, a faint light appeared, flickering like a distant star. Elon's heart skipped a beat. Was it a way out, or was it something far worse? The man didn't slow down, but his gaze shifted toward the light with an unreadable expression. "We're close," he said quietly. "What you'll see next will change everything." As they drew closer to the light, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber. Elon's breath caught in his throat as he took in the sight before him. The walls of the chamber were lined with ancient carvings, similar to the ones on the tablet, each one glowing faintly with an eerie ethereal light. In the center of the room a pedestal stood, its surface covered with dust and age. But what lay atop it made Elon's stomach twist. It was a stone orb, not unlike the glowing orb depicted on the tablet. But this one pulsed with a deep, unsettling energy, its surface shimmering with an almost otherworldly light. The man stopped at the edge of the pedestal, his hand hovering just above the orb. His eyes flicked to Elon's, and for a brief moment, Elon saw a flicker of something in his expression. Regret, perhaps. Or maybe fear. "This is it," the man said, his voice reverberating in the chamber. "This is the power they were protecting, the reason Gene and Betsy died, and the reason you're here." Elon stepped forward, drawn to the orb. He could feel the energy radiating from it, pulling at him almost as if it were calling to him. His hand reached out instinctively, trembling slightly as his fingers brushed the surface of the orb. In that moment, the room seemed to pulse with a deep, resonant The walls shuddered, the light from the orb growing brighter, blinding. Elon stumbled back, his vision swimming as the chamber seemed to spin around him. The man's voice was faint, almost drowned out by the deafening hum of the orb's energy. "You have to understand," the man said, his words nearly lost in the noise. "This isn't just an artifact, it's a key to something much, much older than you could ever imagine, something that's been hidden for centuries, maybe longer. And now it's waking up." Elon's breath caught in his throat. As the orb began to glow brighter still, the energy in the room growing more intense, more oppressive, the ground beneath him shook violently, as if the very foundations of the earth were coming undone. The man's face twisted in a mixture of fear and urgency. "You don't know what you've done," the man said, his voice rising in panic. "You've triggered something that can't be undone. The truth you wanted, it comes at a price." The lights in the chamber flickered one last time, then went out entirely. The room plunged into total darkness. Elon's heart raced as the ground beneath him shook violently, the tremors now a deafening roar. The orb's energy surged, and the entire chamber seemed to vibrate with an ancient, malevolent force. Something was waking up, something dark, something powerful, and Elon was right in the middle of it. Elon's mind was reeling as the world around him seemed to fall apart. The room, which had moments ago been filled with the eerie glow of the orb, was now plunged into complete darkness. The hum of energy that had filled the air was gone, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to suffocate every breath he took. He couldn't see his hands in front of his face, couldn't hear his own heartbeat over the pounding in his ears. The only sound was the low, distant rumble of the earth beneath him, a reminder that something far bigger than himself was at play, something that didn't care about him or his plans. He stumbled forward, his fingers brushing the cold stone walls of the chamber. His heart was still racing, his mind desperately trying to process the events of the last few minutes. What was happening? What was that orb? What had he triggered? "Get a grip," he muttered to himself, shaking his head as if he could will the terror away. But the fear was real, gnawing at him, sinking deep into his bones. And then, as if to answer his unspoken question, a voice echoed through the darkness. Low, guttural, and so filled with power that it sent a chill down his spine. "It's already begun." Elon froze. The voice wasn't the man who had been guiding him. It was deeper, older. A voice he had never heard before, but one that seemed to resonate with something inside him. A memory, perhaps. A long-forgotten whisper. "Who are you?" Elon called out, his voice shaky but determined. The voice answered, its tone calm but chilling. "I am the one who has watched over this place for millennia. I am the keeper of the secret that you've unleashed." A sudden rush of energy coursed through the room, and with it, a flicker of light. Elon blinked, his eyes adjusting to the faint illumination. The walls of the chamber, once smooth and unyielding, now seemed to pulse with an ancient energy, lines of fire-like symbols carving themselves into the stone. "You've awakened me," the voice continued, its resonance now vibrating through Elon's chest. "And now there is no going back." Elon's mind was in overdrive. Awakened, what was this? Who was this? And why did he feel like he was standing at the very precipice of something far beyond his comprehension? The man who had been guiding him, no. The man who had warned him, was gone. Had he left in fear? Had he been part of this all along? Was he a pawn in a game far bigger than he could possibly understand? Why? Why is this happening? Elon demanded, his voice trembling despite his attempts to stay calm. What did Gene and Betsy find? What's the truth? A deep, resonant laugh echoed through the chamber, sending a shiver down Elon's spine. Gene and Betsy. They were never supposed to find it. None of you were, but it was inevitable. The truth cannot be hidden forever. Elon's mind raced as he processed the meaning of the voice's words. Gene and Betsy had been caught in something they never understood, something they hadn't been prepared for. And now it was too late for him to turn back. He had already set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. The light in the chamber flickered once more, and the stone pedestal reappeared before him, the orb resting atop it, glowing with a faint, almost ethereal light. "You will be the one to decide now," the voice intoned. "Will you protect it or will you destroy it?" Elon's hands trembled as he reached out again, his fingers grazing the surface of the orb. The moment his skin touched the smooth surface, a surge of energy erupted through his body, coursing through his veins, igniting every nerve. Images, visions, memories, none of them his own, flashed before his eyes. Strange cities, lost civilizations, powerful forces at work, and then a single image stood out among the rest. Gene and Betsy, standing in front of the very same pedestal, their faces filled with a mixture of awe and fear. They had known. They had understood. They had uncovered the secret of the orb, and it had cost them everything. Elon gasped, pulling his hand back. but the image remained burned into his mind. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice breaking. "What have I seen?" "You have seen what they saw," the voice replied, its tone colder now. "You have seen the past, the true history of the world, but you have also seen the future, a future that will be shaped by the choice you make now." The air around Elon seemed to grow heavier, the chamber's walls now alive with an electric energy that crackled and hummed. The orb glowed brighter, as if feeding off his emotions, his fear, his curiosity. "So you hold in your hands the key to power beyond imagination," the voice continued. "The power to reshape the world, to destroy it, or to save it. But you must decide quickly, before they find you." "Who?" Elon asked, his throat dry. "The ones who—" "Guard the truth," the voice answered, its tone turning grim. "The ones who will stop at nothing to prevent the world from knowing. You've seen what they did to Gene and Betsy. They will do the same to you." Elon's pulse raced. This was bigger than he ever thought. Gene and Betsy had been murdered because they had uncovered something they weren't supposed to know. And now he was in the same position. A target. A pawn. But what had he unleashed? What was so dangerous that it had to be kept hidden for centuries? The voice echoed again, more insistent this time. "You cannot escape this. The truth has been set in motion. The world is already changing." Elon took a step back, his breath quick and shallow. The chamber felt as if it were closing in on him. The pressure was suffocating, the weight of the decision hanging over him like a guillotine. The orb pulsed one last time, sending a jolt of energy through his body. In that instant, Elon knew what he had to do. Before he could make his decision, the ground trembled once again, more violently this time, shaking the entire chamber. The lights flickered, and through the darkness, a shadow moved. A figure, tall and imposing, its features hidden in the blackness. And then the voice, louder now, boomed one last time. "They're here." The rumbling beneath Elon's feet grew louder, more intense. The walls of the chamber shuddered, as if the very earth were about to swallow him whole. He spun around, his heart racing, his mind in turmoil. The air was thick with tension, and the presence of the shadowy figure, silent, looming in the distance, sent a chill through his body. "Who are you?" Elon's voice cracked as he tried to make sense of what was happening. The shadow didn't answer immediately, and for a moment, all that filled the chamber was the deafening roar of the earth's tremors. The light from the orb flickered, illuminating the figure in strange, eerie flashes. Elon's pulse quickened as he tried to peer into the darkness, but the figure remained a vague silhouette. Was this the same force that had orchestrated Gene and Betsy's deaths? Was this the power that had been protecting the secret of the orb all along? Then a voice, low, guttural, unmistakably human, cut through the darkness, sending a shiver down Elon's spine. "You shouldn't have come here, Elon." The voice was rich with authority, deep and commanding, and yet there was an undercurrent of something far more sinister beneath the words. Elon felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't just some coincidence anymore. The danger that had followed Gene and Betsy was now standing right in front of him. Elon stood his ground, though every instinct screamed at him to run. He could feel the orb's power thrumming through his veins, its energy almost alive within. Him, it whispered to him, promising knowledge, promising power. But at what cost? "I didn't choose this," Elon said, his voice barely audible over the continuing tremors. "I just wanted to understand. What's going on here? What is this power?" The figure stepped closer, and as it did, the chamber grew colder, the air thick with the weight of ages-old secrets. Elon could make out the figure's features now. A man, tall and wiry, with a face weathered by time, his eyes dark and piercing. He wore a black cloak that seemed to blend with the shadows, making him almost appear as if he were part of the darkness itself. "I am the Guardian," the man said, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. "The one chosen to protect the truth, and you are a fool to have come this far." Elon felt a wave of realization crash over him. Guardian. That was what Gene had meant when he had written about protectors of the truth. The man before him wasn't just an enemy. He was part of the ancient order that had been guarding this secret for centuries. And now, with the orb in Elon's grasp, that secret was in jeopardy. "You're the ones who killed Gene and Betsy," Elon said, his voice steady despite the knot of dread in his stomach. "You had them murdered because they found the orb. Because they were too close to the truth. The man's lips twisted into a cruel smile, his eyes flickering with an unreadable emotion. "They were warned," he said coldly, "and you are no different. But you are not meant to know." "Not yet," Elon's heart pounded. "Not meant to know? What is this? What is so dangerous about this orb, and why am I here?" The man stepped even closer, his presence overwhelming. "The orb is not just a tool, it is a key to unlocking a power that should never be unleashed, a power that has been kept hidden for millennia. You may think you are in control, Elon Musk, but you are merely the vessel. You are the one who will bring this all crashing down." Elon's mind spun as the man's words sank in. The orb wasn't just a source of power, it was something more, something ancient, something that had the potential to change everything. "What do you want from me?" Elon asked, his voice strained. "What are you going to do to stop me?" The man's face hardened, his expression one of unwavering determination. "You cannot stop what has already begun," he said with finality. "The forces you have awakened are too powerful to control, and you must decide, Elon Musk. Will you protect it, or will you destroy it?" Elon's grip tightened on the orb. The weight of the decision, the responsibility, pressed heavily on his chest. His mind raced. He couldn't trust the man in front of him. But the truth, the full truth, was out of reach. What would it mean to destroy the orb? What consequences would it have? The chamber seemed to close in around him, the oppressive silence broken only by the hum of energy from the orb, which now pulsed with increasing intensity. The earth beneath him groaned again, louder than before, as if warning him that time was running out. "You have to make a choice, Elon," the man repeated, his voice low and urgent. "It's not just your life at stake anymore. The world, everything, will depend on what you decide." For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Elon's mind flashed to Gene and Betsy, their deaths, their final moments in the chamber. Had they been given the same choice? Had they failed? Or had they succeeded in stopping whatever this was before it was too late? Was he doomed to repeat their mistakes? Without warning, the man lunged forward, his hand reaching out for the orb. Elon barely had time to react, stepping backward in a flash, the orb still in his hands. "No!" Elon shouted, holding it out in front of him as though it could protect him. "I won't let you control this." The man's eyes gleamed with dark intent, his face twisting in rage. "You don't understand, Elon. It's already too late. You've made your choice." But as the man's words echoed through the chamber, something inside Elon clicked. The truth wasn't just in the orb, it was in the choices he made now. There was no turning back, but he could still choose how it would end. Elon gritted his teeth, his resolve solidifying. He would make his stand. As the figure lunged again, Elon's world exploded into light. The orb's energy surged, and the chamber was filled with an overwhelming power that blinded him, deafened him. The ground beneath his feet cracked and the walls trembled, as though the very fabric of reality was unraveling. "Stop!" Elon screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the chaos. In that moment, everything was uncertain. The future, his future, hung in the balance. The light from the orb grew so intense that Elon could no longer see. His vision was overwhelmed by an all-consuming glow, a searing white-hot blaze that felt as though it was penetrating to the very core of his being. The power surged through him like a storm, wild and uncontrollable, and he could barely keep his grip on the orb as it pulsed with the fury of 1,000 suns. The ground beneath him shook violently, the stone walls of the chamber cracked and splintered, and the ceiling groaned under the weight of the energy that filled the room. Elon could hear the figure, his would-be captor, shouting, but the words were lost in the deafening roar. Everything was chaos, disintegrating, crumbling, but even amidst the madness, Elon's mind remained clear. He couldn't let go of the orb, not yet. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, that this was the moment of truth. He had been thrust into something far greater than himself, but in the end, the power to control it was his to decide. This choice, this final moment, would define everything. He took a deep breath even as the energy around him seemed to close in, compressing his lungs. His thoughts flashed to the death of Gene and Betsy, how their discoveries had led to their downfall. But it wasn't just their story anymore, it was his. The forces they had awakened were now turning on him. The Guardian, the man who stood in opposition to him, was the embodiment of that danger, but the orb was the key. Elon's grip tightened on the orb as he struggled to keep it steady. The voice of the man echoed in his mind, growing louder, more desperate. "You can't stop it, Elon. You don't understand what you're holding. The world is already changing. You've started something that cannot be undone." Elon felt the truth in those words, but he also understood something else. There is always a choice. The world could either descend into chaos, consumed by the power of the orb, or it could be saved. He could be the one to decide. He turned his head despite the blinding light and saw the shadowy figure charging toward him. The man's outstretched hand seemed to slice through the light, desperate to claim the orb and its power. "No!" Elon shouted, more to himself than to the figure. His voice was hoarse, but the intensity in it was unmistakable. The orb flared, its energy pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeats, pushing back the dark presence in the room. The walls of the chamber cracked again, sending rubble crashing to the floor. But Elon stood firm. His vision, though still clouded by the light of the orb, was sharp. The decision was before him, clear as day. Would he protect the world from the power of the orb, or let it consume everything in its path? A cold realization gripped him. If he let the orb fall into the hands of the Guardian, the world would never know peace. The orb's secret was too dangerous, its power too vast. But if he destroyed it, would it be the right choice? Would the world ever be the same? "Your time is running out, Elon." The figure's voice cracked with fury, but Elon didn't flinch. He could feel the orb's energy aligning with his own. It was a part of him now, and perhaps always had been. In that moment, something deep inside Elon shifted. He no longer saw himself as an outsider to the situation. He was part of it. This wasn't just about controlling the orb. It was about shaping the future, about protecting humanity from the chaos that could arise if it fell into the wrong hands. And he would not let that happen. Elon's hand trembled as he made his decision. With one final determined motion, he turned the orb over in his hand, aimed it toward the Guardian, and released all of the energy that had been building within. A pulse of light shot from the orb, faster than anything Elon could process, and for a moment the entire chamber seemed to explode in a blinding flash of brilliance. The force of the energy sent him reeling, but his mind stayed focused on the task at hand. The room twisted, distorted, and the walls seemed to dissolve into nothingness. The figure before him screamed, a sound of rage, of desperation, and then silence. Elon collapsed to his knees, the orb slipping from his fingers and rolling away into the distance. The overwhelming force of energy slowly faded, leaving only a ringing quiet in its wake. He dared not open his eyes at first. The air felt different now, still. The trembling of the ground had ceased, and the strange hum of the orb had died down to nothing. He opened his eyes, blinking against the dull light that now filled the room. The figure was gone. The chamber, though damaged, was no longer collapsing in on itself. It had stabilized, as though the immense pressure that had held it in a state of chaos had been released. The orb lay there on the stone floor, its glow now dim and faint, its power now spent. Elon stood shakily, every muscle in his body sore from the force of the energy. He took a moment to gather himself, realizing that he had made the only choice he could. The secret, the danger, had been neutralized, but it wasn't over. The real work, figuring out what to do with what remained of the orb, the legacy of Gene and Betsy, and the truth of what had happened, still lay ahead of him. Elon couldn't help but feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. It was his responsibility now. The camera slowly zoomed out as Elon stood over the shattered remnants of the chamber, his face stoic, but his eyes haunted by what had transpired. Did Elon make the right choice? Will he be able to control the aftermath of the orb's power? And who were the mysterious guardians? What will become of the truth now that it has been revealed? One thing is certain. Elon Musk has changed the course of history, but the world may never be the same. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?